What is up, everybody? Back with another video, man. Turning to the Sickening Police Serial Killer by Twisted Minds. Let's get into it.
It is becoming increasingly normal for people with the most social skills and upbeat personalities to be the ones with the biggest secrets to hide. Today's case focuses on one of such people, a friendly neighborhood cop who ended up committing such disastrous crimes, and the worst part is, he probably wouldn't have stopped if he had not been arrested. Welcome back to Twisted Minds. My name is James, and today we will be looking at the case of Mikhail Popkov. Born on the 7th of March 1964 in the cold town of Norilsk in Krasnoyarsk region of northern Russia, Mikhail seemingly had a normal childhood. In truth, not much is known about his childhood and upbringing, except that at some point in his childhood, his family moved from Norilsk to the Russian city of Angarsk. Popkov had a pretty decent educational background, having attended the local public school in the city. However, he did not attend university. Having an interest in the military, Popkov opted for joining the police force instead, working as a regional police officer in the Irkutsk region of Russia. He was in the force for several years before meeting his wife, Alina Popkov, who was also a police officer. The lovebirds got married not too long after meeting and soon had a daughter named Katrina. Soon after having his daughter, Popkov resigned from the police force to work as a security guard at the Angarsk Oil and Chemical Company, which offered to pay better than the police force did. After a few years with the oil company, Popkov switched employers again, this time opting to work for a private firm instead. For the most part, Mikhail appeared as the perfect husband and father. He was often seen spending time with his daughter and was reportedly very devoted to his wife. But how did this seemingly normal man become a predatory killer with absolutely no remorse for his crimes? Well, according to Popkov himself, his killing rage was motivated by the women in his life being unfaithful and immoral. He didn't go into much detail on the subject, but he hinted that the fact that his mother constantly cheated on his father and was unfaithful for much of her marriage. He also hinted that his mother was a raging alcoholic who would often abuse him whenever she went on a bender. This feeling of betrayal only compounded years later when he was married and began suspecting his wife of cheating on him. His response to this feeling of intense betrayal wasn't picking up a habit like drinking or simply confronting his wife. Instead, he chose to go into a murderous rage that saw him kill dozens of young, innocent women.
Nah, that's crazy.
Beginning sometime in 1992, when he was still in the police force, Popkov started his rampage of killing young women who he described as immoral and not innocent. He confessed to having a strange feeling of detest and rage directed at women who drank or simply any woman who dressed indecently coming out of a bar or club. He would normally go on patrols in his squad car.
This dude was to be in like 2022, like society, bro. Yo, the girls would be
and would pass by clubs and bars. There, he would see these immoral women freely flaunting their immorality. According to him, he initially fought the urge to harm any of these women, as he was also a father and husband. But apparently one day, the urges got the best of him. Popkov's first murder was a young woman who he picked up in his patrol car. According to him, when he picked her up in front of the bar, he had no intention of harming her, only wanting to give her a ride home as she appeared intoxicated. But, as he later told police, he just had an overwhelming urge to kill this woman sitting next to him. Finally, giving in to his depraved desire, Popkov drove the car over to an abandoned road, stating that the woman was even too drunk to notice. He proceeded to strangle her in his car till she was blue in the face and stopped breathing. He then proceeded to take sexual advantage of her lifeless body several times. He described the feeling he got as liberating and heavenly. After killing the young woman, he disposed of her body easily by burying her in a shallow grave, knowing fully well that the thick Russian snow would cover the body even further. After his first kill, Popkov said he just couldn't stop and began planning better ways to commit these murders. He would take murder weapons from the police evidence locker, including hammers, ropes, and knives to use in killing his victims, and would wipe off his fingerprints before disposing of them. Popkov reportedly had it tight when it came to his choice of victim and was very particular about this when making a decision. Police revealed that most of his victims were average height, full-figured, with strikingly similar features to his mother. He killed dozens of women. Mikhail's reign of terror continued for several years, even after he left the force. His MO of picking up intoxicated women from bars and clubs did not change much over the years, but his mode of murder got more brutal and vicious. In one case, Popkov cut off his victim's head and still took sexual advantage of the corpse. In another case, he cut out the heart of his victim, tossing it beside the body for no apparent reason other than sheer evil.
What?
He would kill with all sorts of items, including knives, screwdrivers, slip knots, and even an axe, which police revealed he used up to 17 times on different occasions.
Whoa. He used an axe, so that means he had over 17 Yo, okay, that's actually insane. So how many people did he kill?
Popkov was determined to continue his murderous spree for as long as he could, with his reign of terror spread in the 1990s, and it wasn't just limited to his city of Angarsk, but also other neighboring towns, which he frequently visited after leaving the police. Despite the fact that he had left the force, Mikhail kept using his police uniform when picking up his victims, as he came across as a trusting police officer, which was why most of his victims entered his car without much of a second thought. He was charming, charismatic, and sociable, making women trust him without a second thought. But bodies were piling up all over the city and even neighboring towns, and the police were clueless as to who the killer was. The police received widespread criticism for failing to catch Popkov, who was dubbed the Wednesday Killer, because the body of his victims were commonly discovered on Wednesday mornings. The criticism was because the police were working on the vital evidence, like the kinds of murder weapons used, and the fact that his DNA was indeed found in the body of some of the victims.
Ew. Okay, that's actually so disgusting.
Who he had intercourse with post-mortem.
That is disgusting.
Mikhail continued killing into the late 1990s, but his luck almost ran out when one of his victims survived. On January 26, 1998, in an attempt to score another victim, Popkov drove up to 15-year-old Svetlana in front of a public bench and offered to give her a ride home. Svetlana would later reveal that the only reason she got in his car was the fact that he was dressed in a policeman's uniform and he had a police car. After a few minutes of driving, Svetlana revealed that Popkov stopped the car in a wooded area that she didn't recognize because it was dark. He then asked her to get out of the car, which she thought was odd, but did it anyway because, after all, he was a police officer. Popkov told her to take off her clothes, which she did and
With the 15-year-old, bro? Oh my god.
initially refused to do, but she later complied after realizing he wasn't joking and she got scared. After she was completely undressed, Popkov reportedly hit her head on a tree, causing her to fall unconscious. Popkov then took advantage of the unconscious teenager and left her dead.
Bro, 15, bro? Nah.
Thinking there was no way she could survive. But, as fate would have it, she did, waking up the next morning with a bleeding head. Doctors said that she was lucky to be alive, not just because of the violence she endured, but because she survived stark naked in minus 13-degree weather.
Yeah, that's correct.
Young Svetlana had told anyone who would listen that her perpetrator was a police officer, but the police were still reluctant to open an official investigation into the case. It took constant badgering and complaints from Svetlana's mother before the police finally opened the investigation. Svetlana narrated the story to the police, telling them her attempted killer was a police officer. This was where it gets a little bit tricky. After police brought pictures of present and past officers on the force, Svetlana was able to identify Popkov and his car with pinpoint accuracy and surety. But it turned out that having one of their own up for attempted murder wasn't something the Angarsk police force loved to do. Upon investigation, Popko's wife Elena, who was still on the police force, provided an alibi for her husband, stating that she was with him during the time of the rape and attempted murder. This wasn't the first time suspicion had landed on Popkov, as he was identified by another person years earlier who had seen him pick up a woman at a bar, and the woman turned up dead the next day. It was discovered that the victim had syphilis, meaning her perpetrator could have contracted the same STI. Upon testing Popkov, it turned out that he was positive for syphilis, which should have been enough to arrest him at least. But in this same case, Popko's wife Elena provided another alibi for her husband, and the police preferred to take the word of their own over evidence. Many argued that the police intentionally botched the investigation into Popkov after Svetlana's testimony because as much as they wanted to catch the killer themselves, they didn't want it to be a police officer. After Svetlana's testimony, Popkov became more careful but continued his murderous rampage all the same. His next high-profile killing would be Tatiana Martinova and her friend Yulia Kuprikova. Tatiana, who was only 20 at the time, was married with a baby. She decided to attend a concert one night after her big sister Victoria offered her tickets to attend the concert. Tatiana's husband was against her going, but she reassured him, telling him that she was attending with a friend Yulia, who was 29 at the time. After the concert, Yulia and Tatiana went out with a few friends for drinks, and on their way out of the restaurant, they were offered a lift by a policeman in the police car. On the morning of the 29th of October, Tatiana's husband called her sister, stating that his wife had not returned home from the previous night. The distressed husband said he thought that she had spent the night at her friend Yulia's house, but he called to check, and Yulia's mother said that she had not returned home either. Both Tatiana's sister Victoria and her husband went to the police to report the missing, but they were told that they had to wait 3 days before a missing persons report could be filed. Meanwhile, that same morning, the bodies of both women were discovered in the next town. Tatiana's body was cut up badly, while Yulia's face was viciously disfigured with a screwdriver. Both women were taken sexual advantage of before and after they were killed and left naked by the side of the field. Years later, when Popkov would be arrested and his face splashed all over the news, Victoria realized she knew the man who murdered her sister. It turned out that both Victoria and Popkov had been involved in a biathlon together years ago, and that she would describe him as a tall, lean, quiet man who rarely spoke and only watched.
Yo, this dude is actually sick though, bro.
Popkov seemingly committed his crimes under the radar for almost 2 decades until technology and strategy finally caught up with him. The federal police stepped into the case sometime in the late 2000s, and seeing how the
police doing this all the way up to 2012? What?
Police had previously established that the killer was indeed a police officer, they decided to compare the DNA found on all of the recovered victims to that of over 3,500 police officers in the Angarsk area and neighboring towns as well. After successfully getting Popkov's DNA, which was an obvious match to those found on the victims, he was arrested on the 23rd of June 2012, 22 years after his initial murder. He surprisingly cooperated with the investigators, giving them every detail of every murder, even taking them to the scene of the crimes. Mikhail Popkov was charged with the murder of 29 women. The majority
29 kills is crazy, bro. 29 kills and he didn't get caught till 22 years later? What?
of whom were under 25, and others between the ages of 25 and 40, all in the Angarsk of northern Russia. He was convicted and found guilty of 22 murders between 1992 and 2012, and was sentenced to life in prison with no hope of parole. 2 years into his sentence, Popkov confessed to an additional 59 victims, making him one of the most prolific serial killers.
So 20, hold on, let me go to my calculator. 29 plus How many did he say? Hold
Russian victim role. 2 years into his sentence, Popkov confessed to an additional 59 victims,
88.
making him one of the most prolific serial killers
That's
in
crazy.
Russian history.
That's crazy.
He was then convicted of an additional 56 murders and was given a
So another plus another 56, 144.
second life sentence. As if those weren't enough, he confessed to an additional 2 murders in July of 2020,
146.
making a total of 83 confessed killings in his lifetime. Mikhail Popkov was a social